Welcome, everyone. We're happy to be with you this evening to give an overview of some recovery and budget efforts. My name is Amanda. I'm the Communications and Public Involvement Director for the city. And just a little grounding for this evening, the intent of these forums are informational forums to provide a little bit more detail into what the city has put into its recommended budget and to offer some insight into how our community can stay engaged and continue to provide feedback throughout the process. We'll have a couple of different presenters this evening and then take time for questions, followed by a wrap up of again, how you can continue to engage in this process. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Sana. Are you presenting first?
Yes, I'm happy to start us out. Lawrence, if you would enable the slides, that would be great. And actually, maybe let me hand it over to Lawrence, maybe for just a quick, here's how we're working with the budget forum first, and maybe an overview of the agenda, and then I will take over from there. How's that, Lawrence? Would that work?
So I will go ahead and share first the agenda, and then I'll turn it over to you, Sana. Let me go ahead and share again. So thank you everyone for attending tonight. With the time that we have, we're going to be talking about the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, an update there, as well as how you can get engaged with that. Then we're going to dive into the 2022 recommended budget, where we'll go over the process that we've used, some of the financial assumptions, and then we're going to jump into 2 of the city's 7 outcomes. By outcome, I mean groupings of programs and services that are related. So if you think of these kind of categories of safe community and transportation mobility and environmental health, those are categories, what we call outcomes of related programs and services. And so tonight we're going to be talking about neighborhood livability and social health, as well as economic health. Then we'll have an opportunity for questions and some dialogue. And then we will get into the remainder of the presentation, which is giving you information about how you can provide feedback to your council members. The reason I say to your council members is that what we're reviewing will be the city manager's recommended budget. So the decisions of what should be included in the recommended budget are already completed. We now shift our budget process to think about what are the changes that council may want to incorporate before they adopt next year's budget. And that's where your feedback can be influential in informing those changes. And so with that, I will turn it back to Sana.
Thank you, Lawrence. For those that don't know me, my name is Sana Kendall. I am the City Recovery Manager. I have had the great honor of working with the city, actually for about 10 years. When COVID happened, we had really activated our whole organization on how do we really help and support our community with the impacts of COVID. So this timeline is just sharing with you a couple of facts in what was happening from our first known case in March to when we received our state CARES dollars, actually in late July. We were receiving $9 million from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and we were told that we had until December 30th to spend that fund specifically. And so about 75% of those dollars went out to the direct community. The remaining of that money went for such things as additional cleaning, personal protective equipment for our employees. Those are kind of examples of what those CARES dollars were spent from. We were also then told in January of this year that the American Rescue Plan was going to be passed. One of the biggest pieces that we talk about with our CARES dollars is, from July to December, we had to activate very quickly. We feel like all the dollars were spent really well, but one of the biggest pieces we said if we had more time, we would really focus on is around community engagement. And so when we got word that we were receiving our $28.1 million in the American Rescue Plan, and I'll go over what those are, it really was, how do we do this in an intentional way and make sure that we're reaching all of our community in the discussions on how those funds should be allocated, and what does that look like? So we are working on a recovery plan, and Lawrence, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. Our recovery plan that we are in development right now with, we're actually in full engagement. So we're working and trying to do outreach as much as possible, is really looking at how can we make sure that Fort Collins residents and businesses are able to participate in a resilient, vibrant, and inclusive future. One of the big pieces that we do have to acknowledge is around healing, right? COVID was a very traumatic time. We're still not out of COVID. And how do we make sure that we look at this holistically? Our guiding principles, you'll have seen in city plan, strategic plan, and our budgeting process is also around livability, sustainability, and community, and really ensuring that we're not only looking at the immediate needs of today, but the long term for our whole community through funding and transparency. One of the big pieces that we talk about with our recovery plan is we're really wanting to understand what the community needs, and that the dollars that we're going to be talking about with the American Rescue Plan are a way to help get us there. However, we don't want the dollars to drive any of the decisions of our recovery plan. We really want our community and their needs to really drive that as well. So Lawrence, if you could go to the next slide. So just talking a little bit about how we're doing our engagement and the timeline. We're right now in phase 1 where we're really doing engagement. We've held a couple of open houses. We've been to a couple of community events. We're also developing what we're calling stakeholder engagement kits. So if other groups are interested, such as book clubs or others, in having these conversations with their friends and the other folks within the community, they can have that opportunity to do that and then provide that feedback to us that we can then really hear those and work on the plan development. And you'll see that plan development phase 2 is when we'll actually go back to council and say, here's what we've heard thus far. What are we missing? What are some additional ads that you've heard throughout the community? And then after that work session, phase 3 is that kind of gut check. We go back out to the community and say, did we get it right? What else is missing? How can we add into that recovery plan as a whole? And we're looking at December 7th for a plan adoption. Now, again, it's a tricky space where we're also adjusting to the Delta variant and what is happening now. So some events that we had planned on doing outreach have been canceled, but others have not. So you'll see us this weekend at the farmers market, and I highly encourage you to come out and just connect with us, because that's really where we're looking for what is the community need in this recovery space. Next slide, please. So when we come down to the money and cents of this, this is the American Rescue Plan. You'll see there is so much more in the American Rescue Plan besides the money that the city was awarded. This is a $1.9 trillion federal plan. However, the city of Fort Collins has received $28.1 million. We are working with our regional partners and really understanding what is happening at the regional and state level, but really looking at that $28.1 million and how do we help within the full recovery process. Next slide, please. A couple of stipulations around the city's $28.1 million that we received in May is around that this still has to tie to COVID. So an example is we can't just do economic development activities that we would normally do without that tied to COVID. What was that economic impact? So you'll see there are such things as a health response, right? In our CARES dollars, we had only been able to do such things as personal protective equipment, but we could not do mental health, drug abuse, gun violence. However, in this American Rescue Plan, those are items that are allowed expenditures, as is revenue loss. And so you'll see some of those conversations happening. One of the biggest ones that we're learning the most about is around this equity focused service, which is really the true intent of this American Rescue Plan is to serve those hardest hit within our communities, and really looking at understanding what has happened in that our community as a whole there. So you'll see those aspects within those engagement opportunities. What is not eligible is pension fund, debt services, and a federal match requirement. And again, the other big one I would say is it still has to have a COVID economic impact too as well. Next slide, please. So how do you get engaged? Obviously, we're out and about in the community trying to reach out as much as possible. However, if you are not comfortable doing those face-to-faces, we highly encourage you to go to ourcity.fcgov.com/4FOCO to be able to engage with us there. We've got a short survey, we've got our regular long survey. These bubbled items on below are items that we're hearing from our community thus far. Is when we asked what is the needs within our community, we're hearing about mental health, affordable housing, support for our small businesses, music and art, and specifically in that industry of artists, and the social isolation and food insecurity. So those are aspects that we're looking at. And some of these, again, is not ones where maybe the city is going to drive, but how do we partner with organizations to make sure that accessible childcare is available to those that need it, right? So we are, again, still learning from the process, but wanting to make sure that your voice is heard. So we will be out in the community, but if you want to engage electronically, I highly encourage you going on to the Our City page there as well. So I know it was a very quick highlight of the American Rescue Plan, but just wanted to make sure that you guys had an overview of that. And if you had any questions, I'm happy to answer that at the end as well. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Lawrence.
Thank you, Sana. I appreciate that. And so now we'll shift into some of the details behind the creation of the 2022 recommended budget. And first, we'll start with a process overview. So we typically do a 2-year or biennial process for our budget. You can see the calendar months at the top of the timeline there. And in an even numbered year, we would typically start with our strategic plan, which is finalized in the late March, early April timeframe. And immediately we shift into our budget process. And the reason for the purpose, we say, of our budget process is actually to resource the strategic plan with staff and financial resources to go out and provide programs and services to the community. So those budget requests that we refer to as offers are finalized by the end of April. And then we have 2 different things that are happening in tandem in the months of May and June. First, we have that's when our traditional outreach, getting input from the community as far as what is being considered for the recommended budget. And then separately, our BFO teams, which are, we have 1 team per outcome. Remember, those outcomes were those categories of programs and services. And these teams are responsible for reading, understanding, evaluating the budget requests that were put before them, making them as clean as possible, and then ultimately ranking them in a priority order. So let's say that a team gets on average 80 different budget requests. They're going to put all of those in rank order from 1 to 80. That information then is provided by each of those 7 teams to our executive team and city manager. And in the month of July, that group of people are looking across those 7 platforms from the outcomes, those different rankings, and they are making the final decisions of what should be included in the city manager's recommended budget. We go into production in August. And then as of yesterday, September 1st, those documents were delivered to the city clerk's office and made public and available to our council members. And now in September, October, and November, we'll enter into our more traditional budget process that includes city council. But before I show you more of that detail, I want to talk about a few of the differences that we have this year compared to this biennial budget, which is on the screen in front of you. So last year, when we get into the thick of COVID and the pandemic, the impacts were threefold. The first was that we were going to just have a one-year budget. We would do two back-to-back one-year budgets instead of our two-year budget. We would also not be invoking our BFO teams, and our public engagement did not begin until early August. This year, with pandemic recovery, although we still have unknowns and the Delta variant is out there, as we all know, we were able to invoke our BFO teams, as well as starting our public engagement earlier in May, as we traditionally do. And so really the main difference this year compared to this two-year traditional process is that it's still just a one-year budget. As we look into the fall, just this week, we had our first budget session, which was talking about budget assumptions and themes, some of that information being provided tonight. And then in a few weeks, on September 14th, we'll have our first work session where we're taking a deep dive into the 4 outcomes that are shown there: culture and recreation, economic health, environmental health, and transportation and mobility. At the top above the months, you'll see dates for our 2 public hearings. That's an opportunity for any resident to voice their opinion about what is included or not included in the recommended budget. The first of those will be on the 21st of September. A week later, we will have another work session where the 3 remaining outcomes will be discussed. The 5th of October will be our second public hearing. And then we have a last scheduled work session, which is intended for the council to have overall discussion about the programs and services being considered across all 7 of those outcomes, as well as giving staff final guidance of modifications they would like to see brought and included as part of first reading. First and second reading will happen in November, currently scheduled for the 2nd and 16th of November. Shifting now into some of the assumptions. One of the first ones is forecasting and understanding what we anticipate as the amount of money that we would have for community programs and services. So you have about a decade here of data. The left-hand side are all actuals through 2020. And then I want to focus on the last 3 columns on the right. The third column from the right is the 2021 budget. That was the budget for this year that was adopted by council. And notice that the combination of the sales and use tax was $130.8 million, a significant decrease from a high mark back in 2019 of almost $143 million. Well, please notice the second bar from the right, which is the 2021 forecast. We have been very fortunate that the economic recovery has been much stronger than we anticipated. We are obviously hopeful that that will continue, but we do have unknowns from the Delta variant, potentially other variants. And so we are in a very good situation financially this year, where we're forecasting sales and use to actually come in just under 148 million. And then we have a modest forecasted growth for sales tax in 2022 of 3%. So really the key takeaway from here is that the city financially is doing much better than we had anticipated we would this year. And then we're anticipating we would get back to normal moderate growth moving forward. On the other side of the equation, we have our expenses. And so there's a number of assumptions that are included in these budget requests. One of those is general inflation, which we've put an average of 3%. We know that some commodities are having inflation much higher than 3%, and others are lower. So this is an average that's put in, knowing it will not be specific to any one commodity. We have salary adjustments or a merit pool of 4.0% that is recommended. One of the reasons for this is that there were no budgeted salary adjustments in 2021. And to stay competitive with salaries locally, regionally, that is the driver of the 4.0% increase, and also comparison that a number of Front Range cities did have 2021 increases And so again, we don't want to fall behind from a competitive standpoint. Medical costs are slated to increase about 7.5% on average. We've had the fortunateness of the last few years of having a smaller medical increase, but we are looking at that. And that is in line with typical national average increases of 6 to 8%. That is offset that we don't have any increases in our dental costs included in the budget. For retirement, these contributions, there is no change. It's important to point out that these are not pension plans. The city used to have a pension plan that was ended in 1999. So the recipients back through 1999 are entitled to that benefit, but no staff since then is eligible for pension. And so these retirement contributions here are not pension, but there's still no change that is recommended. Moving on to staffing, we know that we're never fully staffed. We always have vacancies. And as such, it would not be prudent to budget 100% of salary and benefit costs. We also refer to those as personnel costs. And so in this budget, we have, we're budgeting at 97% of those forecasted totals. And then lastly, we had $15 million of reductions in the 2021 budget. And we knew that there would be pressure from the organization to want to restore many of those cuts. And one of the important things to consider is that each of those restorations of a cut from the 2021 budget still needs to compete with anything net new that was going to be proposed in the budget. And we'll talk about some of those later. So quickly, the themes that came out were about thinking strategically now to future-proof the city. A lot of talk about asset management. We love the assets that we have around the city, whether it's buildings, roads, parks, trails. And as we build out and those assets expand, they get older, and we have to maintain those to have the same quality of service that we're used to. There's lots of difficult trade-offs in the budget. We always have more needs and wants than we have financial resources available. And that in itself creates the opportunity for having to choose one thing versus another. And that's where those difficult trade-ins come in. As Sana had mentioned, we have the benefit of the American Rescue Plan Act, and we have $4 million of those funds being recommended for use in the 2022 budget. Another theme was about addressing the social vulnerabilities of various populations within our community, as well as continuing to make strides about embedding equity into our budgeting processes. And then lastly, maintaining a focus on our workforce to be able to provide those programs and services to the community. There's a lot of numbers on this chart. There's a couple key things I want to point you to. In that middle column of 2022, you'll see total city appropriations on the fourth line down of $728 million. That is a 4% increase from the 2021 budget of just over $700 million. However, that is not the actual amount that we will spend or the expenses that we will incur. One of the reasons for that is that as a governmental entity, we are required to follow federal accounting standards. And some of those involve a doubling up of expenses. So when we back those things out, we really have a true budget with spend of actual expenses of $543 million. And that is a 3.9% increase over 2021. And now we'll dive into our two outcomes. The first of these is neighborhood livability and social health. We define this as Fort Collins provides a high quality built environment, supports connected neighborhoods, seeks to advance equity and affordability, and fosters the social health of the community. This is the funding for neighborhood livability and social health. The recommended budget includes $19.3 million, and it comes from various funds. The one that I will point out here, the significant, the most of the funding for this outcome is coming from the general fund. That's important to know because the general fund has our most discretionary use of funds that can be used for virtually anything. Now, this 18 million does include different aspects. For instance, there's about $7 million of development review revenue. And that revenue then is spent on development review programs and services. So there is revenue that's generated that's being used to fund specific programs and services in this. But the key takeaway is that on any of these outcomes that we're looking at, the most flexible area that we have is the general fund. So the money in the budget is proposed to continue a number of ongoing programs and services, including affordable housing and human services, low-income rebate programs, support for the homeless, code enforcement, restorative justice, our development review activity that I just mentioned for buildings, forestry, services provided by the Humane Society, as well as the graffiti abatement program. This budget also includes recommendations for additional funding. Part of that would be restoration of cuts from last year. If you'll remember, I said there were $15 million of cuts across all 7 outcomes in 2021. Just under 5 million of that has been requested back, so about a third. So partial funding in all 6 of our outcomes, except for high performing government, for those restorations. Then we have a number of budget requests supported by the American, it should say Rescue Plan, so my apologies. So it's the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. So those offers being for childcare support, an eviction legal fund, increases in funding for human services, an affordable housing fee credit fund, and then increases in our homelessness support. Also included in the recommended budget are budget request for strengthening relationships with Indigenous communities. And then our community capital improvement program, which is one of the quarter-cent taxpayer approved taxes. We have an annual contribution going into the Affordable Housing Fund as well. And with that, that is a summary of neighborhood livability and social health. And I'll flip next and lastly to environmental health, which we define as Fort Collins promotes, protects, and enhances a healthy and sustainable environment. The funding on this outcome is significantly different. You'll see that it mostly comes from utilities, primarily the water and wastewater utilities, at a total of $60.4 million. The next highest contributor to this outcome is our natural areas at just under 14 million. And then you'll see there's a smaller contribution of general fund monies. There really are very few programs that generate revenue within this outcome. And that's one reason that you see the general fund contributions to this outcome less. And then there's a handful of other funds that are making contributions. In the recommended budget, we would of course continue our utilities with water and wastewater, but the budget also includes recommendations for continuing conservation of water and electricity, continuation of the natural areas, and specifically the Nature in the City program, waste reduction efforts, and then various aspects of sustainability, including indoor-outdoor air quality, as well as our commitment to the climate. And then some of the additional funding that is recommended within environmental health, again, partial restoration of those cuts in 2021. There is American, again, this should be Rescue Plan Act funding for the Innovate Fort Collins Challenge. Conservation, xeriscaping incentives for HOAs and commercial properties, a study for dirt recycling, improvements in air quality priority and working regionally on those issues that are important to our community. Within that community approved tax of CCIP, funding for the Nature in the City program. And then lastly, a redeployment or shift of dollars that would have gone to the household hazardous waste program, shifting that to stormwater education and public outreach. One of the things that makes this possible is the hard to recycles yard at the Timberline Recycling Center, which has been expanded to accept more household goods than you would traditionally think about recycling. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to our facilitator for questions and discussion.
Thanks, Lawrence. So I noticed, and we might want to pull the slide back up, but in the first outcome area, which is neighborhood livability and social health, there was a budget offer around engagement with our Indigenous community. And we do have a question about whether a session could be scheduled to engage the Native and Indigenous community for issues related to land, air, water, wildlife, Is that something that you would foresee being part of that offer, or can you speak more to the opportunity to engage our Native and Indigenous community more?
Yes, I appreciate the question, and this goes for all populations within our community. So these three budget forums are meant as a combination of information sharing, both about the American Rescue Plan, as well as the 2022 budget, and some of the content that's there. And most importantly, how do you as residents get involved and become engaged and get your opinions out there? And so at the end of this presentation, we'll be including some of those. So that'll be included in these materials. But off the top of my head, I would say that the two best opportunities for that are both of our public hearings, which are on the 21st of September and the 5th of October. And then also it is my understanding that a few council members will be holding a listening session after the third work session. So at the end of October, that would be. And that would also be an excellent opportunity for any and all populations to weigh in, and where you'll have council members listening directly. Again, why that's important is the council needs to hear the voices of the community, because it's now council who's changing this recommended budget into our community's adopted budget. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, and I think kind of in a follow-up question, there was a question about, I know the city often looks to other communities in terms of best practices around budgeting. And there was a question around whether the city had ever worked with other cities in the nation who also work closely with tribal nations. There was a couple examples like Salamanca, New York, or Seneca or Green Bay. Just wondering if on the budgeting side of things, if that's been a conversation with our budget teams, if we've ever tapped into other cities who have a more formal relationship with tribal nations.
So the very simple answer is no, we have not yet. I love the suggestion. I'm glad some examples were put in the chat, because I can absolutely make a commitment to follow up with some of those municipalities and learn about the good work that we're doing. If there are other suggestions of communities to reach out to, I would request that those also get put in the chat so that I could follow up with those additional resources as well. That's a fabulous suggestion. I really appreciate that.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing a whole lot of other questions coming in at the moment. So maybe we can switch over to the engagement preview, and I'll still keep an eye on Q&A in case anything comes in while you're showing the kind of the next phases and ways people can engage.
That sounds great. So with that, I will go ahead and share again. And I'll ask for confirmation that you can see the slide.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so now to really the most important part. How do you get your voice heard for our council members? As I mentioned earlier, we have 3 of these budget forums today, talking about giving some highlights on neighborhood livability and social health, as well as environmental health. The next 2 are both next week. So one on Wednesday from 4 to 5 o'clock, where we'll cover the outcomes of safe community and transportation mobility. And then the next day at the same time on Thursday, 5:30 to 6:30, where we'll be covering those remaining 3 outcomes. All of these are being recorded, and they will be posted to our city, which we'll give you a demo of in just a moment, so that anybody who's not able to attend either tonight or any other night will be able to listen to the conversation and get this information as well. So in a nutshell, first and foremost, we are trying to really leverage a very helpful, user-friendly technology solution called Our City. You can see the website there of ourcity.fcgov.com. Hopefully an easy way to remember that if you know our city's main page of www.fcgov.com, we're basically swapping out the www for Our City. Again, we're going to give you a tour of this in just a minute, but on there you'll be able to see how you can provide input and be engaged on both the American Rescue Plan Act and the 2022 budget. If you prefer, there are direct web links that are listed there for both of those projects. We also have the 2 upcoming public hearings on September 21st and October 5th, where all council members will be listening to the voices of the community and what they either like or don't like in the budget. And that will help inform the decisions that they'll be making for what staff needs to bring back for first and second reading in November. And then the last area is communicating directly with your council member. A couple ways you can do that. You can go on to the website listed there on fcgov.com/council and see the email address for your specific council members and or being able to communicate to all council members. Also, you can send your thoughts to Amy Rezagy. Her email is listed there. Any responses that we receive will be combined with feedback that we get on our city and other engagement opportunities. All of that will be summarized and presented to council on our 3rd scheduled work session in the fall, that being on October 12th. And so now let's go ahead and go into an Our City demonstration. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and pull up the web page, and then I will share again. And again, looking for confirmation that you can see the web page in front of you.
Yes, we could see it.
Thank you very much. All right, so putting in the ourcity.fcgov.com brings us to the landing page of Our City. So this main landing page will have all active projects. And at the top, you'll see the top 2 projects being the 2022 budget and the 4 FOCO, and that's where we're getting engagement on the recovery plan itself. We'll first go into the 2022 budget. If you had taken one of the links and pasted it into your browser from the presentation that was direct, you would be brought to this landing page. And the overall look and feel of most of these Our City projects where we're getting engagement input will be somewhat similar as far as navigation, but we're going to go through both of these projects quickly. So there's some introductory information here. Notice right away, we're asking about how much time do people have. If you have 1 minute, 5 minutes, and then there's more I'll show you momentarily, but each of these is really directly relating to these tabs down here. Think about this as the specific areas where you're getting engaged and there's a potential activity there for you to be participating in. Going down to this continue reading, if you have 10 minutes, or some people may have more than 20 minutes and would like to really take a deeper dive. That could include a budget engagement toolkit. If you wanted to have conversation with friends, families, other organizations, we can also have engagements with group of people. Those can be requested through this email as well. As you scroll down, you'll notice that the same information is in Spanish. You'll see that it's slightly different on the 4 FOCO page. And it'll be interesting to see how the kind of feedback that we get of which works better for our community. But as you scroll down here, you're going to have these different tabs of things you can do. And then various information is posted in chronological order. And so most recently, being yesterday, the recommended budget was released. So you could click here to click on the recommended budget, which is a 500+ page document. It's very detailed, lots of specific technical information in there. For the majority of us, that might not be so accessible. And so after hearing feedback from the community last year, we have our budgets in brief that are both in Spanish and English. Going up now to the top on the right-hand side, we have our document library. Here also you can see the recommended budget documents. Each of these, if you click on it, so I'll click on the Spanish version of our budget in brief, it will open up a new tab. And can you see that or not? I don't know if that will. Okay,
Yes.
So thank you, excellent. So this is just a 24-page document that is written in much more straightforward language. It's highly visual. We're hoping that the community receives these documents well in getting information about the budget. Other information in this, we have this engagement toolkit, both in Spanish and English, for activities that you could do with coworkers or neighbors, as well as access to all the narratives or descriptions of the budget requests that were considered for the recommended budget, as well as prior budget information and the strategic plan. We have a number of really well done videos. If you hover over any of those videos, you can see the name of it, as well as the duration of that video. And we have those both in Spanish and English. There's an FAQ session, key dates, and contact information if you have questions. So that was the page for the budget process. I'm going to go back. This is that landing page for our city. And now we'll do a similar run through of for FOCO. Notice here on this, everything is in English. Remember, that was a difference where on the other project, so it's both in English and Spanish. Well, you can choose en español here. And what that will do is it will change all of the text from English to Spanish. So it's a different look and feel, and we're very curious how people will respond to both of those. And maybe it's just personal preference. So going back to the English, because I'm not a fluent Spanish speaker or reader, we have introductory information on this left-hand side. Again, how much time do you have? 1 minute, 5 minutes, or more? In some of the more, there was a community conversation last week on Thursday. If you weren't able to attend that and have an interest, you can view the recording here. Alternatively, there's another one coming up on September 22nd, and you could sign up here as well. For other information, you can reach out to Sarah Malign. Her email is here. Scrolling down, similar to the budget page, you have different types of engagement activities here. Seeing one right away where people are sharing one idea. You can read the entire thing. You can provide comments on it. You can heart it if you like it. And then up on the right-hand side, you can put in your email address. So as updates are made to this page or there's new additional engagement opportunities, you will be notified of those in your email. So go ahead and subscribe if that's of interest to you. Related projects, this takes you to the 2022 budget project we just looked at. This will change the text to Spanish also. Here is the life cycle with those dates that Sana had previously shown, as well as some documentation and other material resources that are available. So I realized that that was a quick overview, but whenever there's new software or new tools, sometimes just unfamiliarity with it can be a barrier of wanting to get in there and play. And so hopefully this make both of those projects on the Our City page more accessible to you, because we really want to hear your voice and what's important to you in both of those aspects. And how about I stop right there, see if there's any additional questions that came in, and if not, then I'll bring up the presentation for our last slide.
Yeah, I think we have another question that popped in. And so there's two parts. So I'm going to actually probably ask you both a piece of this. So Lawrence, can you talk a little bit just about efficiencies, and then, in terms of our budget, growing, or should it be decreasing? How do we sort of assess whether we're on par with just kind of the general overall budget growth year to year? And then Sana, maybe you can speak a little bit to the council process for circular economy. I know that there's something coming up in the future. Does that work for you too?
Yeah, so for improvements and efficiencies, really appreciate the question, because that's an important aspect. We have a number of programs and services that we refer to as ongoing programs and services. I've received comments or questions in the past is, oh, does that mean that something that's existing today gets a free pass and is automatically continued into the future? The answer is no. Every budget request is reviewed. And one of the important pieces of information that is required on any ongoing type of offer or budget request is listing of what are those improvements and efficiencies that you've made over the past year. It is our responsibility as city staff to be the best stewards of taxpayer dollars that we can. And part of that means not resting on our laurels. How do we become more efficient, and more effective with those taxpayer and fee payer dollars? So that's important. And on our website, you can read all the offer narratives, which includes on those ongoing offers, the improvements and efficiencies that were included as part of the description of the budget request. The second question about how do we know that we're on par with other cities? That is a challenge because City A compared to City B is not necessarily an apples to apples comparison. For example, City of Fort Collins offers 5 utilities, 4 of them the traditional utilities of water, wastewater, stormwater, and electricity. Big one that we don't offer being gas. Many cities in the Front Range don't have their own utilities. They purchase those services. And so if you're going to compare our size of budget, which has about almost half of our budget is on the utility side of things. And so it's very important to understand those differences. And it's challenging. That's one of the reasons you'll see in our charts and graphs, we compare a government portion of expenses to what we call enterprise, which is utility programs and services. Again, because it's not an apples to apples comparison. One of the things that we can do is look at what we refer to as the price of government. And in a nutshell, the price of government is how much do we as individual taxpayers pay? How much of the income that we collect is used to pay for federal, state, and local government? On average, 35 cents of everyone's tax dollars go to pay for some level of governmental services, broken down between those 3. At a local level, that's generally been around the 6.5% or so. What we've seen in within the City of Fort Collins is that our price of government has been coming down. Now, one of the drivers, to be fair of that, is that this price of government is calculated on what is the cost of the expenses in the budget, but then what is that as a proportion of the community's income? And as you all know, from looking simply at housing prices and how they have gone up, we have had a number of new residents coming to Fort Collins who have a higher than average median area income. So that also does contribute to our continually declining price of government. But one of the things we would want to watch too is understanding if that would have an upward tick or a trend, what is driving that? Some of the things that might drive that in the future is as we start to pay attention to asset management, there could be big dollar items. You'll see some of those that we were not able to fund in this budget. Funding of those things are significant, the multiple millions of dollars. And those could have an impact on our price of government, but it's also about taking care about what we have, what we own, which provides some of the amenities and reasons that we love to live in our community. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sana for the last part of that question.
Thanks, Lawrence. Yeah, the question around circular economy is twofold. So it is a council priority that they'll be discussing actually next Tuesday at council, specifically around the council priorities and how those might be achieved. One of the components, if you pull up the council agenda item summaries within this specific one, is talking specifically about the tie-in with the implementation of our Climate Future plan, as well as the Economic Health Strategic Plan. And if you recall, well, actually, sorry, next conversation, Economic Health Strategic Plan is being one of those that are recommended with the American Rescue Plan funding specifically. And so we will see that work through. In the recommendation right now is to do the engagement and the work in the 2022 year. And so I just wanted to share a couple of places where you could engage is next week's council priority conversation. And then in the Economic Health Strategic Plan, as well as our Climate Future teams that have been reaching out quite a bit in terms of engagement. So those tie-ins, I think, is super helpful to be able to say, again, we are trying not to silo, and really, how do we look at what plans are already in place and how do we help in really engage in those spaces as well.
Thank you both for that. So we have just a few minutes left. So Lawrence, if you want to pull up your final slide, I think we're rounding out our first info session here.
All right. So what should be coming up now are chronological list of dates. starting with the first work session where we're diving into each of the outcomes. So you can see these outcomes here. Again, the two dates that I would really point out for those watching are the public hearings on September 21st and October 5th. Of course, there's also an opportunity for public comment at either first or second reading, but to have the most impact on informing council for their final decisions, both of those budget public hearings and also the upcoming listening session with some council members would be fantastic opportunities to have your voice heard directly by those decision makers. And with that, that's the end of our prepared materials.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight and all the information. We, again, are recording this session for folks who maybe didn't get a chance to join us live. And Alejandro, just want to say thanks to you as well for supporting our interpretation this evening. And with that, we will wish you all a nice evening and hope to see you at the next one. Take care, everyone.